Let us take a moment together at the beginning of this meeting. Time to arrive here in our minds as well as our bodies. Time to put aside the busyness of the day so far and to prepare ourselves to focus on the business of this meeting. Today in the Christian year, this is the feast of Candlemas, when we remember Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus going as a family to the temple in Jerusalem for the rite of purification. Today marks the official end of our Christmas celebrations. It is a time to take down the final decorations and turn our focus away from the birth of Jesus towards his passion and sacrifice on the cross. As the new year opens up and gathers pace, do we find our focus shifting? We hope that this new year we will be able to move on from the uncertainty and restrictions of the COVID pandemic. We look forward to being able to have more meetings face to face, to gather together for celebrations such as the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. In our local government, we turn towards the forthcoming elections and all the work that goes into campaigning, hustings, and carrying out the electoral process. And we look towards newly elected and re-elected representatives for the people of Merton. With lighter days, we look towards the spring and the first signs of new growth and new life in our parks and green places. With this comes the hope of working together in this borough for fresh air and a sustainable future. So we look to new beginnings. Let us pray. Eternal God, you make all things new and are for us a sure and certain hope. Be with us this evening in our thinking. Give us clarity and discernment. Be with us in our discussions. May they be honest and fruitful. Be with us in our decisions. May they be for the good of all of Merton's citizens. As we look to the future and new opportunities arising, we ask that you help us to be open to new ways of doing things. Be with all who are offering themselves as candidates in this year's elections, that they may be intent on serving the people of this community, ensuring that Merton is a clean, safe and secure place to live. So we ask your blessing on this meeting. And as we end our prayers this evening, we give thanks to God for the life and work of George Reynolds, who has died. We remember his family and his friends as they mourn. May he rest in peace. Faithful God, hear our prayer. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Judge. And that's sad news indeed. There'll be a moment's silence later on at the appropriate point in the agenda. Please welcome to this meeting of the Council. It's the last regular meeting, I think, that I'll be chairing, because we have the budget one next. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Therefore, if you are participating in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded and to the use of those recordings for broadcasting. If you have any queries regarding this, please speak to a council officer. There are no fire drills scheduled for this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building immediately by the nearest available fire exit. If you're unable to use the stairs, a member of staff will assist you. The meeting will reconvene if it is safe to do so, otherwise it will stand adjourned. Members, when you are speaking, the traffic light system will operate here and your timer on screens will indicate when you come to 1 minute remaining. Your microphones will be operated within the council chamber. Members attending online, if you are down to speak, please operate your own microphone. Thank you. I would say at the beginning, we are still, I've visited 2 schools today. I'll come to an announcement later on, and the numbers of COVID are rising in our schools, certainly. And we agree that our leaders pre-meet that all members would take a lateral flow test before coming, just to reassure our colleagues around us. So I hope that has been the case. I'll move on to apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence? Councillor Draper.
There are, Chair, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's a bit of a list here, I'm afraid. Councillor Skeet is sick, as we know. Councillor Chung for bereavement, and the following 4 for COVID, for Omicron, and they'll be following us on Zoom. Councillor Stamford, Councillor Kirby, Councillor Christie, and Councillor Atawar. Everybody else in this group has tested negative.
Thank you. Councillor Barlow.
Councillor Bukhari is absent for urgent family reasons.
Councillor Southgate.
Mr. Mayor.
Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest?
I have a declaration under item 13, Lavender Nursery. I'm a governor of Melrose School.
Mr. Mayor, I also must declare my interest. It's a non-pecuniary interest as the Deputy Chair of Melbourne College.
Thank you for both those. If there are no other declarations, we'll move on to item 3, which is to approve the minutes of the council meeting held on the 17th of November.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
On the minutes, please, if I may. Before we agree the minutes, can I please confirm that agenda item number 13 was agreed unanimously and the following passage was resolved? Council calls on the authorities to take great care to protect the safety of public servants and for everyone to respect the importance of civility in public life. And indeed, if the minutes are correct, then it would appear that Councillor Stringer, even though she voted for the motion, does not take the resolution seriously. Mr. Mayor, I am not suggesting that Councillor Stringer would want to incite violence, but there are some in society that may take her comments literally. That is why to put out a tweet saying that great speaking to voters keen to give the Tories a good kicking and that all Tories are awful is deeply disappointing and dangerous. Furthermore, the tweet was accompanied by a photograph in which the leader of the council, the joint leader of the council, Councillor Draper, Labour activists, and indeed yourself, Mr. Mayor, appeared. I am sure that you would all now like to distance yourself and condemn these foolish and irresponsible comments.
That is not a request to amend the minutes. It's a comment on. That's right. Okay, thank you. Are the minutes therefore agreed as they stand? Great, thank you. So, moving on to item 4. That's an opportunity for me to make some comments and feedback. I would certainly, before I do make my comments, I think it's appropriate at this point to observe a minute's silence for George Reynolds, who was a councillor for Collierswood Ward from 1998 to 2010 and overlapped a number of us here in terms of our term here. I think maybe Councillor Williams, you're the only one from your side that would remember him, but he was a larger-than-life character on the council. So I think that we should stand in a minute's silence as a mark of respect. And I know I had not met George's daughters, but I will be writing from the Mayor's office on behalf of the council to express our condolences to his family. As far as my updates, this is, am I getting that the wrong way? Okay, sorry, yes. Does the leader or chief executive have any updates, announcements to make? Right. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to use this opportunity on behalf of the Labour Group to register our strongest possible concerns that the government is not allowing councils to meet in hybrid form any longer, and that this is having a detrimental impact on the democratic process. We on this side are 4 members down due to COVID, and we on this side stick to the rules on COVID, and so our members are at home isolating. We have all taken a lateral flow test, and those of us in here have tested negative. But being 4 members down has an impact on the democratic running of this council. It has a disproportionate impact, and we need to register in the strongest possible terms our annoyance and irritation with the government that they have not brought back, as promised, the proposals to allow hybrid working and remote voting and digital voting for councils. And we think that's something that should be overturned at the shortest possible time, and we wanted that put on the record because it's affecting a meeting like this and it's upsetting the wishes of the people of Merton.
Right, thank you, Nida. In terms of my updates, we've had a time of a tightening of restrictions, so some events didn't happen, and it's very sad that the Christmas dinner had to be cancelled just before Christmas, following the Prime Minister's announcements the very night before. So it was last minute. It seems that we can't arrange another date for a full meal, but there are, and I will point you out, a number of items still to come. We do have the meal at Aya Restaurant on the 17th of February, which we moved from January just to make sure that it was clear of any other restrictions. There are still seats available at that. We have the bake-off event, and the mixology event, which I think I'd like to promote and push now. If you want to nominate someone to do that, it's going to be an evening. It will raise some funds, but most of all, it's an evening of fun. 20 people rather, cooking in the kitchen, supervised by some students and lecturers, making muffins, learning how to do cake decorations, and another 20 making cocktails. You will be able to take away the cocktails in takeaway cups. You're not going to be enticed to drink them all there. So you can share those, take them back, and then we'll have the opportunity to eat some food cooked by the students at the end of the evening when we're judging the bake-off. Half the muffins will be, you'll make 12 muffins, those who are competing. 6 you can take home or eat on the night if you want to, and 6 will be frozen for morning coffee for the Mayor's Charities at South Thames College. So they're really committed. I'm really pleased with the partnership we've got with Taste Restaurant and the college. So please do, if you want to nominate an officer as a councillor, or as a councillor you want to nominate a councillor to be not humiliated, but to learn new skills in the kitchen, that would be good. Or nominating across the floor even. You could actually buy a ticket for someone on the other side. So that would be good. And then we have the 2 afternoon teas, which are selling well for AFC Wimbledon on the 3rd of March, and for all the All England Tennis afternoon tea on the 17th of March. And of course, the Mayor's Ball, which is more than half sold already for the 9th of April. And I'm hoping there might be an extra item put in, which could be a cabaret evening. A friend of mine, if he can get into the country, visas sorted, it will be towards the end of April or the beginning of May. So that's an extra thing. So please do consider those. As regards the things that have happened so far, I'm delighted to report that my new best friend, Shane Ritchie, has been doing sterling work for the Mayor's Charities. At the end of every performance, he really pushed. Those who went to the pantomime would have seen that he was very upbeat about the Mayor's Charities in his closing statements at the end. And he mentioned it at all 50 performances. I went to see him before the last performance to thank him for his efforts. And altogether, we've got £11,500 raised from bucket collections at the end of pantomimes, which is phenomenal. And that's really down to his positivity and his enthusiasm. There were 1 or 2 performances where they only had 3 dancers on stage. And if those who saw the charity night, the Queen Rat was the 4th version of Queen Rat by the end. And the one who was doing it had a book in front of her because she'd been sitting at home on the Tuesday morning and was called to say, would you like to join the cast of Dick Whittington? She lived in Epsom and she came in, rehearsed an hour later, and then was on stage for the last few performances, sometimes prompted with her book. The person who was there was an 18-year-old who stood in as Alice, and the dame was a dancer from the swing. So it was they got through it, all 50 performances, and I think that their determination reflects a lot of our determination to make sure that things go on as much as possible. That was great. So the fundraising is going well. I have visited today Harris Merton and Ursuline High School for girls, and I think that takes my number to about 16 or 17 schools so far. I still want to get through as many as possible. And I've even taken my mum back to Wimbledon Park School, the school that she went to she started there in 1933. So it will have changed a bit since then, but we're going there in a couple of weeks' time. So please do take up the offers of all those events that we're raising funds for. It's an incredible year. People said that it would be an incredible year, and it is that, just because I'm meeting so many good people who are doing so much for our community. And saying thank you to a lot of people. So that's, I think, what the Mayor should be doing, and I'm enjoying that aspect of it. So I will now move on, having indulged you for that little run through what we're doing in the Mayor's office, to item 5, which is public questions. We've got 5 questions here, and I will read through the questions. Answers provided by the appropriate cabinet member. Each questioner can then be invited to ask if they have a supplementary question. I'm going to call each person's name in turn. Please unmute your own microphone at home if you're calling in, and please keep your supplementary question brief and not a statement. Okay, first, Barry Smith.
I'd like to thank the council for their answer. Though it's obviously very disappointing that the council will have gone 6 months without installing a single additional charging point by April. In your answer, you refer to TfL funding, which will be needed for installing further charging points. So my question is, what is the council's plan B if the expected TfL funding does not become available?
Councillor Lanning.
I'd like to thank Mr. Smith for joining us this evening, and also for his initial question. I think I would share his frustration, and that setting up additional electric vehicle charging points is very much an ambition for us. We are, to a degree, at the behest of TfL, but it is still in our plans. We are completing our EV strategy and will be rolling out as many as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank Pocock.
Yeah. Can you all hear me? Yes. I thank the Cabinet member for the update. However, after 12 years of Labour trying to get Morden regeneration started, does he accept that Morden will only be regenerated under a Conservative administration?
Councillor Welton.
I'd like to thank Mr. Pocock for his supplementary question. I don't agree with him in terms of this comment. Council, we have actively worked to deliver this regeneration, but also as well the question of getting funding for the regeneration. So we are still in talks with Homes England in terms of looking at potential money for that, because we recognise that this is an important project, and as a council we are still fully committed to regeneration. But this is a complex jigsaw. It won't happen overnight, but as a council, we are working ambitiously to deliver regen in Morden. Thank you.
Richard Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the Cabinet member for their response to my question. I suspect many parents like myself in Cannon Hill will be surprised to learn that Joseph Hood Recreation Ground, which according to the council's website is 8.5 hectares in size, is too small to take play equipment for children aged 12 plus. Can the Cabinet member confirm that incredibly the amount of space available in the park of 8.5 hectares in size is indeed the only barrier, other than perhaps their lack of ambition, that the council can see to more and updated play equipment at Joseph Hood Rec?
Councillor Irons.
Hello, I'd like to thank him for his question and his supplementary. And I think, every single one of us knows how important our green spaces are to this borough. The results of our Your Merton survey made that plain and clear. And I think all of us used our green spaces far more during the pandemic. I think I'll refer though to the original response in that if you do have locations specifically that you want to see different types of equipment put in, please do speak to the green spaces team and we can review that as and when things need to be replaced.
Michael Patterson.
Well, I thank the Cabinet member for the answer, but I'm sure she will understand that residents want more than the mere anticipation that something will be done. Will the Cabinet member guarantee that at least some of the 16 Morden Park tennis courts will be refurbished?
I thank Mr. Patterson for his question, but can only tell you that the Green Space team is working with the LTA to assess borough's tennis facilities with a view to revitalizing those that require attention. This is carried out via an application process. The process will currently in development stages with the anticipation that Morden Park, Links Avenue End, along with other tennis facilities in the borough will benefit from this grant funding. Thank you.
Christopher Coombe, finally.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the Cabinet member for the reply. If I may ask a supplementary. As all the parties on the council have stated that they are against the All England's development, will Merton Council please explain how they will enforce the covenants? And this question is no longer hypothetical amid rumours that the application is to be pushed through Planning Committee in March. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Coombe for his supplementary. The planning application is a altogether separate matter from the covenant. As I have been clear before, there is a legal covenant in place. It's in place and it's staying in place. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the questions from members of the public. We'll now move to item 6, councillors' questions to Cabinet members. These have been published along with the responses from Cabinet members. I will read out each member's name in the order they appear in the agenda, and invite them to ask a supplementary question. Please, as I said before, ensure that supplementary questions are brief and not a statement, and we will get through as many as possible, hopefully all of them in the time allocated. Councillor Butler.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her question and, of course, her ongoing great work that she does for the borough. My question is, what are we doing about this devastating impact of the government's failure to fully fund our SEND services since 2018?
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for his supplementary. We are doing everything that's in our power. So we've already increased the number of dedicated places for children with special educational needs, either in special schools or additionally resource provisions, but in local authority run additional resource provisions or special schools. And by September, there'll be 276 further such places than there were just a few years ago. But we can't deliver on all of our plan without further funding. So that's why we are, as you get at in your question, calling for the government to deliver that further investment. And why we in Merton are working closely with the department to make the case for the funds that we need to deliver on our plans to bring our spending on special educational needs in line with the income. Thank you.
Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In his answer, the leader gives the impression that he's keen for this application to move forward, after which we'll surely find out what the fairly ambiguous intention for the covenant to be respected actually means. In which case, why is the council kicking this issue into the long grass, with a senior officer telling me last week that this won't go to planning until after the election? And when was the council intending to communicate this to residents?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the follow-up question, which was slightly confusing. Some of the it wasn't sure whether it was talking about the application or the covenant. Planning applications obviously are a planning matter and have to go through a planning process, and planning applicants have rights there and can choose when their applications are to be dealt with. In terms of the covenant, all the party leaders have been briefed on this, and all have been advised that it would damage any potential court proceedings to share legal opinions or offer early judgment on them or on the planning application. And I hope that all members here will agree that anyone divulging confidential information that led to decisions that were harmful to the people of Merton would be rightly condemned by the people of Merton. And I hope that all the leaders here will guarantee that if that happens, any losses to the people of Merton will be personally underwritten by the councillor who does it.
Councillor Christie will be joining us remotely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the Cabinet member for her response. Could I ask her if she can tell me how environmental enforcement is also playing its part in helping to keep our borough's streets clean?
I'd like to thank him for his question and his supplementary. I think the first thing to always say when we're talking about enforcement is the overwhelming majority of our residents want to take pride in our borough and take responsibility for their waste. However, we have to acknowledge what we do with those who don't. So last year we issued over £800,000 worth of fixed penalty notices for littering and fly tipping offences. And according to the Sun newspaper, we've issued the most FPNs for littering in the entire country, double that of our neighbours over in lovely Wandsworth. So we have one clear message for anyone who's not taking their responsibility seriously: don't mess with Merton.
Thank you. Thank you. And in increasing proportion of the residents live in blocks of flats. Why are there so many experiencing problems getting their bins empty? And does the cabinet member think it is fair to treat the residents in a flat like second class citizens?
I'd like to thank you for his question and advance notice of his supplementary. I want our collection services to work just as well for front doors as they do for flats, that period. I've asked officers to look specifically at how our business continuity plans that were laid out in the original response are impacting on smaller blocks of flats across the borough. If he has specific addresses he has in mind when he submits this question, please do let me know, and I will ensure that they're looking at that.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much for the answer. There are a number of sites that the council is selling, and it's true that some of them, the former ransom sites, are going to be 100% are going to be affordable housing. But the other sites, my understanding is the Cabinet have left the decision of the officers on what the percentage of affordable housing is. And does the Cabinet member agree with me that that is a political decision that should be made by politicians rather than officers?
I'd like to thank Councillor McGrath for his supplementary. Of course, any decision that is made by the Director is in consultation with the Cabinet member. That's the same for a number of different decisions. Clearly, there is close cooperation between the Directors and the members, and it's the scheme of delegation in terms of the Council. It also enables us as well to speed up decision making within the Council, and of course that decision can be called in by any members if they so wish.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for our response. How does growing up in poverty affect a child's life, and what are you doing about it? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor for her question and her supplementary. So we know that growing up in poverty is horrible. Some of us know that from experience, others more don't know it from research or for indirect experience. But we know from research that also, on average, children growing up in low-income households have poorer outcomes later in life. So they're, on average, less likely to get the best grades at school. And even when you control for attainment, they're less likely to go on to good jobs and complete good university courses. That's why we are so worried about the cost of living crisis, which the national government is doing very little to address. So we in Merton are doing what we can to tackle poverty at its source with our policies such as the council tax rebate scheme. And as a Children's School and Families Department, we're doing everything we can to ensure that those children who are growing up in low-income households are getting the support that they need in school and out of school so that they can achieve well. Thank you.
Councillor Holt.
Thank you to the Cabinet member for her answer. Given the Mayor of London's direction of travel to tax and ban cars off the road, does the Cabinet member agree with me that this cost of car will be detrimental to the residents' cost of living in Merton?
I'd like to thank Councillor Holden for his initial question and also his supplementary question. Ultimately, as this council also agrees, we need a sustainable long-term solution to actually get residents to switch their vehicles from high polluting vehicles to lower polluting vehicles. Part of that is a wider challenge which we need to invest in, and so I can't agree on his point.
Simpson.
Member for the response. Residents have told Labour repeatedly that Merton suffers from a pollution crisis, and apart from taxing parked cars, little or nothing has been done. So if Labour had listened to residents, they would know this, and it wouldn't have cost them £1 million of taxpayers' money either. So will the Cabinet member please accept that our air quality will only improve when we have a change of administration to a Conservative administration on the 5th of May?
I'd like to thank Councillor Simpson for his supplementary question, but I'd have to disagree, and I think the Healthy Streets scorecard would also disagree, as we were ranked second in all outer London boroughs for the work that we're doing to combat toxic air. Almost half of our schools have a school street, and we've just unveiled 68 new air quality monitors to track and monitor air quality data so that we can inform our decisions. As I mentioned in my previous answer to Councillor Holden's question, for us, a priority is to tackle toxic air, and that is what we will continue to do.
Okay. Councillor Dehaney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would thank the leader of the council for his response to my question. But would the leader agree that one of the duties of being a leader is leading by example? If he told us in Merton to do one thing and then did another himself, what impression does he think that would give the people of Merton.
Can I thank the my colleague for his question and supplementary? I imagine that he's referring to some other events elsewhere, and I would like to reassure everybody in Merton that it has never been within the rules in Merton to hold parties in the leader's office. If I were to have held parties in the leader's office, I think I know what consequences there would have been for me. I think I know the police would have knocked on my door. I think I know that the opposition parties would have said something. They might have said the leader that has had this illegal party should step down. They will have another opportunity in a moment to say exactly the same thing. Nothing, not a pip, nothing. They are prepared for leaders to break the rules that they set that cause harm to our residents and face no consequences. This is the Conservative Party in Merton. This is the Conservative Party in Britain, and they should be ashamed of it.
Councillor Omar Bush.
Can I thank the Cabinet member for her response? The CYP papers for last month shows that the council has not succeeded in getting a single care leaver onto the Kickstart scheme, despite over 100,000 people across the country finding employment through it. Why has Merton Labour failed to get any care leavers onto the programme?
Thank you. I am actually delighted with this question because I would love to be talking more about our care leavers, our most vulnerable young people in this chamber. What I don't like is when people trying to score political points when actually, as you can see from the existing description, we're doing really well in supporting these young people. What we pride ourselves on is treating this as a kind of cross-council issue. It's not just the Children's Schools and Families team. We work across the council to try and make sure that the right opportunities are found for those young people. If it was your own child, you wouldn't put them onto a scheme with a vacancy that just happened to be there. You would want it to be the opportunity that was right for your child. And we as corporate parents take our corporate parenting responsibilities seriously. And we're proud that we get so many of our young people into employment training. We're proud of the breadth of opportunities that we offer them. And we want to make sure that they're moving into sustainable employment that means that they'll be in jobs for the rest of their lives. Thank you.
And the final question, Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for his response. But can I ask the Cabinet member to tell us what measures he's been taking so far in Merton Council buildings to work towards targets set in the Climate Change Action Plan?
Can I thank Councillor Curtin for his supplementary question. In 2019, the Council began purchasing renewable energy guarantees of origin, which certify that 100% of the energy it uses is from a renewable source. This means that electricity purchased by the Council is very low carbon. We're also committed to using electricity efficiently where possible to produce local renewable energy and to switch to a low carbon electricity supply. We've also as well installed 44 solar panels on council-owned buildings, including 27 schools. This is an area we take incredibly serious, and you will obviously shortly see more measures we will be bringing forward in terms of our transition to make the council zero carbon by 2030. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We've got through those without reaching the limit. So we're now going to deal with strategic theme main report, which is on health and well-being. I'm going to invite a Cabinet member to present and then seek a seconder. We will then take the councillors' questions on the cabinet members on the strategic theme, and then I will invite members who wish to speak on the main report to do so, and then we'll move to a vote. No amendment this time, so it's more straightforward than last time. Councillor Lanning, please can you present the strategic theme report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, you might have read this report like a catalogue of seemingly insurmountable health challenges, the same ones facing every borough in this country: COVID and childhood obesity, mental health and air pollution. But Mr. Mayor, at its core, our report tells a different story. It's a story of successes centered around the power of an extraordinary team and a culture of trust. It's a story where our directors, at the peak of COVID, spent their evenings driving to hardware stores to buy protective screens for our care homes. A story where our officers down tools on a Friday evening, only to be back out delivering COVID tests on a Saturday morning in sub-zero temperatures. Mr. Mayor, it's a story of values, of dynamism, commitment, and proactivity that has been nurtured in this borough. But Mr. Mayor, the heroes of this story aren't just hidden away in this building. The team I'm referring to extends well beyond organisational borders, because at the heart of our team in Merton is our voluntary sector, without whom we simply wouldn't have achieved the success we should be proud of in tackling COVID. Mr. Mayor, with our voluntary sector partners, we set up the community hub in just 5 days, and we delivered 1,000 COVID tests within 48 hours to combat the South African variant. And working with groups like Vein Voice, the Association for Polish Family, and Merton Mencap, we were able to gain the trust of our residents who didn't trust the science, didn't trust the government, and didn't trust institutions like us. And we encouraged them to come forward for vaccination. But Mr. Mayor, our team doesn't stop there. This team that was positively singled out by the Department of Health for our care home vaccination rate, the same team that was the quickest to mobilise designated settings for COVID positive care home residents. It was this team that was so successful because it included our NHS partners. And Mr. Mayor, let's not forget that without NHS investment, we wouldn't have been able to retain the dementia hub at its base in Mitcham. Mr. Mayor, you might be right to scrutinise broken promises over the years. Remember that we could not hope for a new health service at the Wilson without the NHS, nor could we deliver health on the high street in the east of the borough, helping meet shared priorities from the Your Merton consultation to regenerate our high streets. And Mr. Mayor, that is what is key, our shared priorities, to bridge the gap and address health inequalities, to protect the environment and tackle climate change, to support social and economic development. We're more than the sum of our parts in Merton, and as we transition to a formal integrated care system with our NHS and voluntary sector partners from July this year, let's embrace this logical step in our relationship and fully commit to integration. Because, Mr. Mayor, sometimes it's easy to point the finger, to observe long waiting lists or growing health inequalities and call out someone else's inaction, to create division and barriers. But in the end, we are one team working towards one ambition across the council, the voluntary sector and the NHS. So, Mr. Mayor, if we're going to meaningfully tackle the challenges in this report, let's not hide behind organisational silos, but embrace the diversity of our Merton team. Because, Mr. Mayor, if we fail to do so, the only people we will really be failing are the people we were elected to serve. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. This is being seconded by Councillor Kenny. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right? Right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, COVID has shown us how essential our healthcare system is to our community. It is intrinsic to our lives. It supports us in the present and the future. Start well, live well, and age well are essential to quality of life. Without this strategy, very many people would have a shortened life. Whilst these three areas are essential, I want to focus on Start Well. This impacts and supports live well and age well. Start Well demands excellent care for the unborn child and mother through excellent maternity care, as well as the early years of life. St Helier is greatly respected for its maternity unit, which provides the vital start in life for every child. True, not all Merton children are born in St Helier, but very many are, and a significant number come from the poorer areas of Merton, and this group especially need this excellent care. If maternity services are removed from St Helier, this will hit the deprived communities. This group often does not have access to faraway hospitals. They are not able to jump in a car, relying instead on public transport. If they have other children in tow, they are more likely to find it impossible to make hospital appointments. Thus, their care is diminished. Affluent areas are not so reliant on their local hospital, as they have a head start when born into wealthier homes, which is why it is essential that St Helier remains in situ and is not downgraded to provide a state-of-the-art hospital in the green and leafy, sparsely populated Belmont area. Levelling up comes to mind, being in the news lately. Mr Mayor, children born into impoverished families require more support to thrive. The support is vital from the day the child is born and must continue through childhood to ensure that they live well and age well. Read the Nuffield report for the facts to confirm this deprivation in the east of our borough. No one in this room wants health inequalities. Preventing inequalities is the overriding reason to keep St Helier. COVID has made our children and young people aware and passionate about the opportunities of start well, live well and age well. Yes, they too care about older people. Mr Mayor, Merton's health provision works unstintingly to offer great support to everyone's development. Yes, it can and needs to do more. We have a great national health system. This has repeatedly been reinforced during the pandemic. However, there is a need for the continuing improvement of Merton's healthcare. We all need to demand increased funding and adequate staff for our health service, a service which underwrites the provision of better healthcare at the start well stage. This is the foundation of our future. Today's children are our future. We need them to have the very best start. This needs to be supported by the state-of-the-art hospital being built at St Helier. This will provide the greatest support to those less fortunate than some of their peers, all part of levelling up. Finally, Mr Mayor, Merton and its health provision and healthcare are great. Support Merton to do an even better job. Support Merton to reduce and remove health inequality. Support this strategic theme. Support the levelling up of the east of the borough and provide the state-of-the-art hospital at the St Helier site. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
We will now take councillors' questions on the strategic theme and then continue with the debate. Firstly, Councillor Kenny, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Will the leader join me in reiterating once again that if the government insists on moving services away from St Helier to Belmont, it will only further disadvantage people who are already most in need?
Point of order, Mr Mayor. The question reply is completely inaccurate. It refers to the government's decision. It is not the government's decision. It is the NHS's decision. And Councillor Kenny has just referred to the government. It is not the government. It is the NHS. So can we please be accurate? No, but that's their decision.
Is this a point of order or a speech? Is it a point of order?
Thank you.
What point of order are you making? Which standing order are you referring to in your point of order?
Can I just, Councillor McLean, you can't raise a point of order on a question, I'm advised. So please can the question be, that can be addressed in debate, but can we ask the leads to respond?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to my colleague for her supplementary question and the point that he made. I think we see from the ridiculous outburst where the NHS are being blamed for government decisions. When the Prime Minister stands up in the run-up to an election and says he won't stop hospital building programmes, and this is one of them, he is not prepared to take credit for those. It is absolutely preposterous that the Leader of the Opposition is seeking to disown his own government's decision, which they believe is going to make matters better. But everybody in Merton knows it's going to make things much worse. If Councillor McLean supports the closure of services at...
Can I please ask for order? We have a question that's been, please, Councillor McLean, will you stop speaking? I would like to ask Councillor Allison to answer the question that's been asked without interruption. Please. Councillor Allison. Can you address the question? Thank you.
But I would also like to highlight to everyone here that Councillor McLean has just accused me of being dishonest.
You're not being accurate.
And it may not be Parliament.
Can you please address the answer? Look, I'm not prepared to have the questions go in this way. The questions are being asked of cabinet members. The cabinet members will answer. Please, can it be uninterrupted? If you wish to speak in the debate, that's another matter. But I think we need to keep to that principle that we've been able to abide by through my time as mayor and previous times as mayor. So please, the answer to me the answer to the question, but directed to me, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I have been speaking through you about the behaviour of other members in here. And I would like to register again my extreme unhappiness about members on this side being accused of dishonesty by people on that side. And I think it is telling that the decision that the government has been making has been disowned in this way. And I think that is telling because of precisely the point that everybody in Merton knows that the decision to close services at St Helier Hospital will hurt precisely those people the NHS is there to serve. And we will be repeating the importance of the health of our most vulnerable residents, those who live in the areas of greatest need throughout the next 3 months. And we will stand by that. If they want to stand by what's being decided by the government, they can stand by that.
Councillor Williams.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank the leader for his answer to my question. At every council meeting for 10 years, I asked Councillor Alan Brittis what he'd done since the previous meeting to save St Helier Hospital. And I did that because he came to this council through a by-election in 2003, where the whole campaign was Save St Helier Hospital. Who from? A Labour council and a Labour government, or was it an NHS decision? We get a different version tonight from the leader of the council as to who it is that takes these decisions. But I'm going to ask you about a decision that you can take. So will you confirm that your campaign to save St Helier Hospital now has no substance except rhetoric to frighten residents for political gain, and there are no council resources currently being deployed by officers to support the campaign? It's just words.
I'd like to thank him for his follow-up question, which at least was polite, unlike the current leader.
That's been asked.
I would appreciate it if the heckling would be prevented as well. We began with a bit of a history lesson, and I will remind all members here, including Councillor Williams, that in 2009 and 2010, the then Labour government did bring forward proposals to save St Helier and to rebuild St Helier Hospital. And they put in place a funding of £219 million to do that. Ever since then, unfortunately, the Conservatives and Lib Dems took control of the government, and that offer of a new rebuilt hospital for St Helier was taken away. And we will continue to remind people about that, and we will continue to make the case against that. And in every meeting I have with the health service, and in every meeting that many of our officers have with officers from the NHS, we repeat that services for the most vulnerable are most needed, and those people are those who live in the areas closest to St Helier Hospital. Losing St Helier Hospital will be a terrible thing for this community, and there is still time to reverse that decision, and I call on the government to do so.
Councillor Alan Brittis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the Cabinet member confirm she will continue to prioritise making the Wilson Health and Wellbeing Hub a reality for our residents in Mitcham? Thank you.
I'd like to thank Councillor Alan Brittis for his supplementary question, and I can confirm that it absolutely will be a priority for me, and that the NHS has secured funding and in the process of developing their business case. And I'm also delighted that we have our Director of Adult Social Care and Director of Public Health who are steering the ship as well for the Wilson.
Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her reply to my question. A report to Merton's Healthier Communities and Older People panel has just been released, and within that there is the indication of significant reductions in flu vaccinations for the under sixes, which include reception, year 1 and some year 2. I wondered, given local experience with COVID vaccinations and boosters, whether the Cabinet member has any views on the reasons for this or proven interventions to improve the situation. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Councillor Fairclough for his supplementary question. I know that this is an area that is of particular interest to him, and appreciate his correspondence on this as well. I think the experience from the COVID vaccine is something that we're definitely learning on. It still needs to be considered that there is a difference between the uptake of flu vaccine and the uptake of COVID vaccine, but absolutely is a priority for us and something that we are looking into, and I'll be able to provide more correspondence on the work that we're doing on that.
Okay. Councillor Draper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her excellent answer about our excellent libraries. I'd like to ask her if she could tell us about what support there is in our libraries for young people looking for work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Draper, for your supplementary. I'm very proud that our libraries help young people find work by offering employability support services that work directly with training providers. Most of you will probably know that I'm a governor at South Thames Group of Colleges. The Mayor mentioned them earlier. I'm one of the people that we work very well with. These people help with the library, help people to train and to write CVs and help them in getting jobs. They're also looking at, in the council, as well as the libraries and the colleges, apprenticeship. Not everyone wants to go to university, so we need to find other means. Training skills, there are lots of things, like, for example, NVQ training for railway traineeship, DJ skills for those who like music. So there are lots of things going on for the 16 to 25-year-old. I would also like to bring to the attention of those who seems not to know that the libraries are open frequently, like from Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and the lists are on the council, the library doors, and they're also on the website, because seems as if in this chamber, most people think that the library isn't functioning. It is functioning and doing very well. and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you.
Councillor Adam Bush.
Hello.
Okay, sorry. Can I start by thanking the Cabinet member for her response, and can I thank the Merton Health team for their work amongst the BAME community rollout, specifically around Wimbledon Park Mosque. The report mentions the local outbreak management plan and its work with the BAME community. As the report was published in April last year, what lessons have been learned from the recent COVID outbreak, and how will this inform future thinking? Thank you.
Councillor Lanning.
I'd like to thank Councillor Bush for his initial question and also his supplementary question. I think there have been a number of learnings in terms of engaging with the BAME community in terms of improving uptake. I think we've worked really closely with some of our voluntary sector colleagues, as I'd mentioned, but also with our faith groups, and tried a lot of different things really. So webinars, but also something that worked really well was sort of peer support and one-to-one sort of phone calls with some individuals. And I think there's still future learning. And coming back to Councillor Fairclough's supplementary question, I think this would spread across all of uptake of other vaccines as well. So there are definitely future learnings for recovery as well. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her answer. Given the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our BAME communities, will the Cabinet member agree it is absolutely critical that we do everything to address these inequalities?
Councillor Lanning.
I'd like to thank Councillor Pearce for his initial question and his supplementary. I think in my response, I would echo a similar response to the one that I provided to Councillor Bush. I wholeheartedly agree. And I think while the government has today launched its Levelling Up white paper in Merton, we're trying to make Bridging the Gap a reality. And that is embedded in our plans for COVID recovery, working closely with our NHS colleagues and our voluntary sector.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her response to my question. Sadly, we witnessed at the COVID update at the Healthy Communities Overview and Scrutiny panel in January, the Council's continual failure to address the importance of climate action in tackling climate-sensitive health risks, which are disproportionately felt by the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. I therefore request that she incorporates, where possible, the 10 recommendations in the World Health Organization's COP26 special report on climate change, which highlights the urgent need to prioritize health and equity, making them central to all climate action, mitigation and adaptation actions into Merton's Climate Action Plan. Thank you.
Councillor Lanning.
I'd like to thank Councillor Good for her initial question and her supplementary, and for reference to the report that I know that our public health team is looking into. I'd like to reassure her that climate action is central to all of our work, which is why we have Chris Lee, who is also as part of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and bring the NHS to speak about their green plan as well, so that we can work across climate action together. Of course, I work closely with my colleague, Councillor Welton, who is leading on our work in climate emergency. But as a council, we take health and all policies very seriously, which is why health climate action is embedded across all departments.
And the final question, Councillor Anderson.
Stan. Stan. Question.
If you've already given your supplementary question to the Cabinet member, then I can move straight to the answer. Well, thank you.
Yes, well, I will just say that we are fully committed to pursuing initiatives to encourage our residents to switch to more sustainable modes of transport, which includes making Merton a cleaner and greener borough, as that's what our residents told us they wanted as part of the Your Merton consultation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the question on the strategic theme, which again we got through in the time. 7C on the report says strategic theme motions, but there were none submitted for this meeting, so we move straight to the main debate on the strategic theme report. I have the following list to speak: Councillor Janice Howard and then Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Janice Howard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Mayor, sorry. Firstly, thank you to the director and officers involved in pulling together this report. It really does give us a good insight into the progress made against the 5 strategic priorities in the business plan. So I'll share my New Year's resolution, that is to be more positive and to look at how we can achieve more. So in the time allowed, I shall focus on just a couple of areas. It's clear that the pandemic has had a huge impact across the borough. However, the government, the NHS, the council and the wider support networks are to be congratulated in having done a fantastic job delivering the vaccination programme, with almost 3 million vaccinations having been given in the southwest London. But we do need to focus on our residents who are still hesitant about the vaccine and taking the booster jab, ensuring there's an ongoing dialogue with our communities so we increase that uptake. As we emerge from lockdown restrictions, there are many issues to tackle, which we have been made worse by the pandemic. For instance, an increase of obesity, mental health issues, and a backlog of patients awaiting diagnosis. The government have allocated 12.4 million to construct a series of community diagnostic centres across the southwest London health area, recognising the extra focus required to provide staff and equipment to tackle this backlog. The good news for Merton is that there are centres planned in St Helier, the Wilson, the Nelson, Raynes Park and St George's, which should give residents much faster access to diagnosis of their problems. In addition, the introduction of the new model of mental health support called iThrive expands the existing service at the Get Help stage, plus introducing mental health clusters in schools so that our young people have ready access to support. We cannot underestimate the increasing need for mental health services, and we must embrace new ways of supporting our residents. This report has much good news, and I do hope that the nature of our holistic approach to healthcare delivery continues so that our residents do start well, live well, and age well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I also would like to thank the officers for their report and also their response to our questions that were not covered by the report ultimately. Mr. Mayor, to start with, the administration group chose this theme, and yet they've seemingly nothing specific to say about it. There's no recommendations, there's no strategic theme motion. The report itself is only just over 20 pages. And so I wanted to ask, Mr. Mayor, what does the administration see as the point of bringing this theme to this meeting, and have they thought about it? Now, collectively, we represent the people of Merton as councillors. Now, councillors should help set the agenda and hold the cabinet to account. And this is Cabinet's opportunity to not only tell us what's happening, but to be honest with us about what's working and what's not, what they've learned, and to set the direction for the future. And we can challenge them and add to their thinking. Now, the Cabinet member will be aware that I've been following up on the strategic theme motion passed by Council when we last looked at this theme in late 2020. That motion was about learning the lessons on what was effective in terms of immunisations locally, and Councillor Adam Bush picked up on that as well. But what I've been sent is simply a description of some things that have happened. Undoubtedly, many of these are good things, but I'm actually interested in learning the most effective intervention and how that's measured. And I'd make the same comment with regards to this whole report. It tells us a lot of things have happened. not really why, nor how effective they were, nor what was learned, nor what the administration wants to do next. Now, I'll dig into the detail, some of the detail, Mr. Mayor. The report assures us that the system is being tended to and that its needs are borne in mind in all that health and care colleagues do. But what about local people? Key indicators of health and well-being are going in the wrong direction, locally and nationally. Health inequalities continue to entrench and people are suffering. Para 3.4 states that schools are struggling to pay for staff to cover absences. It notes not all staffing absences are covered by COVID-19 funding from central government, and therefore most schools continue to incur additional costs. Well, how many schools? What level of costs? What's the impact of this on the borough's children? And what are you doing about it? Para 4.7 notes that many young people have struggled with their mental health. In response, the report states that Camden is moving into new improved premises in the new year to meet this demand. Mr. Mayor, I recently spotted Easter eggs in the shops. The year isn't new anymore. There's no detail of why new premises will help and no detail of what that will be or when it will happen, how many children are suffering from poor provision, what the options are for responding to it. The report simply doesn't say. Instead, it just mentions a significant rise in referrals. Now, para 5.16 and 17 on workforce wellbeing could have been a really important part of this report. I'll come off my script briefly here to mention councillors as well. I mean, we've all just witnessed a fairly unedifying kind of battle about St Helier between the red and blue teams. There'll be people watching who want to join us as councillors. That intervention there, Councillor Allison, is exactly why. What side are you on? There'll be people watching who want to be elected as councillors and staff.
Give Councillor Fairclough time. Right. Thank you. I have no further speakers. Councillor Lanning, do you wish to use your right of reply?
I think only quickly, just to make the point that actually in healthcare, we are facing one of the most significant changes in the next couple of months, where we will be transitioning to an integrated care system, which is covered in there and will require significant changes across health, social care and public health, which is the fundamental sort of core of the report. So that is, I would say, the biggest thing upcoming.
Can I please call for a vote on the strategic theme report? Is it agreed? Great. Thank you. We'll now move on to the reports of the community forums. There have only been two that have met since the last council meeting. Firstly, the Wimbledon Community Forum. Councillor Holmes, will you formally recommend this report to the council?
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I do formally formally move the report to the council. The meeting of the Wimbledon Community Forum included an update on London Assembly business from the Assembly member, a report on the Your Merton engagement, and also a debate, an interesting debate on the future of the forum itself. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
The Raynes Park Community Forum, item 9. Councillor Quillam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to move the report. We had a good discussion and some useful updates from officers on COVID, and a really useful update from our Assembly member, Leonie Cooper, on her work at the London Assembly. Thank you.
Before we begin, it should be possible to conduct this item and debate it in public session. However, please do not refer to the content of any private legal advice, and I will be taking advice if necessary during the speeches, so please consider that. Councillor Kohler, please move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure I speak for the vast majority in Merton when I say we are proud that our borough hosts the finest, most famous tennis tournament in the world. Yet, whilst we take pride in the ALTC, they are proposing to take advantage of us. When the freehold was sold to the All England Club in 1993, the promises were firm and the covenants watertight. That's why the price was so low. The land would only be used for recreational purposes and would not be built upon. But now the ALTC have come forward with this plan to build a 10-storey show court, fell over 300 mature trees, build 9 kilometres of road, install 38 additional tennis courts, grass, it's true, but each bounded by concrete, construct 10 or so ancillary buildings, dredge a lake that's home to the endangered European eel, destroy much of the last vestiges of Capability Brown's design, disturb reed beds that are critical to a vast array of bird life, and threaten the roosts of the 7 varieties of bats that currently breed in the park. Not to mention plaguing the community with 8 years of building work and HGVs, dredging and disruption. And what's the ALT's justification? Times have changed. Indeed, they have. That's why the borough declared a climate emergency. And the last thing Merton needs to meet its carbon targets is to produce a concrete monolith, an industrial tennis complex in the heart of Wimbledon Park. Last week, I convened a meeting with representatives of the Wimbledon Society, Friends of Wimbledon Park, Merton Friends of the Earth, the Capability Brown Society, Belvedere Estate Residents Association, and Wimbledon Park Residents Association, who were unanimous in their opposition. But we realise planning applications are problematic, particularly when decisions can be appealed, which takes me to the point of our motion. But let's be clear, even if the ALTC managed to get planning permission, they cannot bring even one cement mixer into the park, provided the council keeps its promise to enforce the covenants. And that's all this motion asks. Even if the All England Club is willing to break its promise to the people of Wimbledon, we are simply asking the council to confirm that they will not do so. I consequently hope that all parties can support our motion. Although I cannot help noticing that the Labour group have been peddling the lie on social media that because we and the Tories are opposed to the LTC's plans to concrete over vast swathes of Wimbledon Park, both parties are opposed to the creation of a public park. Nothing could be further from the truth, which is why we have concerns about the Labour amendment, which replaces the verb enforce with the much weaker term respect. This appears to be more than an amendment for amendment's sake, which Labour often do, and brings into question the council's resolve in ensuring the covenants are enforced, come what may. Councillor Welton, in answer to Christopher Coombs' question a few minutes ago, you said the covenant will remain in place. But that's not the point. The issue is, will you enforce the covenant? Not will you keep it in place, yes or no? Given Labour's weasel words, please reject the Labour amendment and vote for our motion. Thank you.
This has been seconded by Councillor McGrath. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I would like to reserve my right.
Okay, thank you. We have an amendment. Councillor Allison, would you move your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move our amendment. It is intended to be helpful. It makes it very clear that there is a planning application in process and that there is a legal covenant in force. However, while it may be confusing to some, the fact is they are separate issues and we do have to deal with them separately. It would be irresponsible and illegal to predetermine these matters before they have been through the correct processes. However, I have to say I am surprised by the opposition parties. If you were to scour all they've ever said on this, you would think there was nothing of merit on offer. Councillor Kohler has even called, outside of this chamber, the whole thing a vanity project. Yet there are several elements of this scheme, this vanity project, where I think their opposition is letting down our residents. For instance, they have a chance tonight to join Labour and support plans for an exciting new public park. London's first new public park since the Olympic Park opened 10 years ago. Land that will be freely open to the public for the first time ever. Remember, the golf course is private land. Even when the council owned it more than a generation ago, it was not open to the public, only golfers, most of whom are very rich. The plans also include a new public path around Wimbledon Lake, 1,500 additional trees, and a biodiversity package that will create diverse natural habitats for a range of protected species, something the National Guardian described as offering a near perfect urban greening factor. The proposals also add grass, not concrete, tennis courts, sporting facilities that could encourage residents to watch or take part in sport, with all the benefits that bring. I should stress I am not a member of the planning committee and I am not one of the council's lawyers, so I don't want to prejudge anything. And I was not a councillor more than 30 years ago, more than a generation ago when decisions were made. God knows I don't agree with everything Merton did in the 1990s, like letting Wimbledon Football Club go. So I don't criticise Wimbledon Tennis Club for coming back to us after a generation. They're one of the borough's biggest employers, great for our economy, and a big contributor to our business rates. They also provide huge investment in school sport and sport in general. Like anyone else, they're entitled to put a planning application in on their own land, and I want to make it clear personally, I'm not convinced of everything. In particular, the plans for a new show court. I'm not on the planning committee, but I expect Wimbledon will need to prove to members of that there are no alternatives and that this is essential to the future of the tournament. There is a legal contract to ensure the park benefits residents, and it's only for leisure and recreation. And it seems to me that we should respect that contract to make sure the gains of any developments outweigh the losses. And I personally am also against closing roads during the championships. But unlike the Tories and Lib Dems, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. While they call this a vanity project and oppose the whole development completely, Labour supports the creation of a new public park. So I hope they will join us tonight, support the park, the trees, the lake, the biodiversity, and open this land to the public for the first time, not just in a generation, but ever. I move.
In terms of the fact that I was referred to being on the council a generation ago, as Councillor McCabe and Councillor Williams probably feel the same. But thank you. Councillor, this amendment has been seconded by Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I must say that Wimbledon is a place that I love to go to, and I know that most of us like it. Everyone is looking for a ticket as soon as they're coming out. So Merton loves sports, and I'm proud to be the cabinet member for encouraging sports. I'm delighted that under Labour, AFC Wimbledon has returned to its home, finally here in Merton, after 30 years in the wilderness. And I was delighted that this weekend we welcome another professional team to our borough for the first time ever, when Rugby Leeds London Broncos took on one of the game's biggest names, Wilderness. Mr. Mayor, without disrespect to the AFC Wimbledon or London Bronco, they're not global names. We host one of the great global sporting events, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. You would not know that from the Lib Dem motion. The Lib Dem says proposal that will modernize the tournament, allow more sports fans to enjoy it in Merton, are a vanity project. I'm not quite sure they know what they mean. And they demanded the council block the development. The Tories too have not a good word to say. For more than 100 years, the land have been private golf course and has never been open to the public. The only people able to watch or play sports there have been those who can afford to and pay the fees, mainly the rich old English white men. Why do the Lib Dems want to keep this land so exclusive? It makes no sense to me. They say the proposals will concrete over the land, but the land will actually be grassed. So I don't think you've been reading too much into what you've written. The Lib Dem seems not to like sports, but I can tell them the tennis at Wimbledon is played on grass. They should look it up. They might learn a thing or two. A man called Andy Murray played there, and so did a woman called Virginia Raynes. Their names are on the boards if you don't believe me, so you can read them later on. As the leader said, the proposals also include the first new park in the capital since the Olympic Park in 2012. The public will finally be allowed onto the land, which has only ever been private before, and an incredible 1,500 trees will be planted. Now, I'm not a member of the planning committee, and there may be a good reason to turn down the application on planning grounds. It is for them to decide, and quite right too. And I'm not a lawyer. There may be good reason to enforce a covenant. Somebody's got their phone on, particularly when it comes to the size of any show court. But if we listen to the Lib Dems or Tories, there's not a thing of merit in their proposals. Not the park, not the lake improvement, and not the sports. They're opposed entirely 100%, can't see any good. They want to stop more people enjoying sports in our borough, so we are amending the motion. Let us tell the whole truth, consider the whole application, and let us trust the planning committee, of which his Lib Dem team colleague Simon McGrath is a member. I know he likes Wimbledon really. So I urge to show balance and respect and support our amendment and stand up for sports in Merton now. I second the amendment.
Councillor McGrath, I have one other speaker to speak after the proposal and second of the amendment. Do you wish to speak now? Okay. Councillor Barlow.
To councillors and Stephen Hammond, our MP, have personally listened to the views of hundreds of residents on this issue. What's more, we have ensured representatives from the All England and the council meet them and listen to them too. We've heard the many reasons why the local community oppose this application. What unites all is the view that legal agreements made to reflect the concerns of the local community at the time of sale must be upheld, even if listening to and respecting local opinion is an alien idea to the present day council leadership. The leader ducked my earlier question about putting off this planning decisions until after the election. There are only two reasons they would do this. One, they think it's easier for them to ignore the electorate after the election, or two, they hope it will soon be somebody else's problem. Residents feel shut out. They do not believe the council can be trusted to deal with the matter transparently and in accordance with due process. We asked for the legal advice to be published because residents made clear to us that's what they wanted. None of us are naive enough to think the All England have not already had legal advice on the issue of the covenant, or that they don't have full confidence that they can get their plans through. So the All England have their legal advice, the council have their legal advice, and residents, who at present trust neither the All England or the council, have nothing. True to form, Merton Labour's recent statement on the application ignores the hundreds of residents who responded to the planning application and shows that they either misunderstand or deliberately manipulate the issue of the covenant. Like Councillor Kohler, I share his suspicions about the intent behind their amendment. The Liberal Democrats are of course welcome to support our campaign and that of Wimbledon's elected Member of Parliament, as they do with this motion. But there's a couple of points it would be helpful for them to clarify. On their website, they claim to support the land being used temporarily each year to bring qualifying to Wimbledon, but not outside the terms of the covenant. Not by building on metropolitan open land and without the loss of trees. Could they please explain exactly how this works? Either the land is converted to be used for tennis or it isn't. How do they suggest 38 tennis courts are built temporarily and in a way that does not impact the land they are built on? Or are they trying to pull the wool over residents' eyes? Just as they are by pretending they are in any way capable of delivering a fresh start for Merton. This reminds me of another pre-election slogan, Jo Swinson, Britain's next Prime Minister. Whatever happened to her? Again, their words have no basis in reality. The only way that any party can have any real influence over the All England or anyone else for that matter is by running the council, and that isn't going to be the Liberal Democrats. Maybe they could make a fresh start by telling the truth. Mr. Mayor, we can only hope that we do have a council that wants to grasp this issue after the 5th of May, a council that residents know respects them and reflects their views. Thank you.
Councillor McGrath.
Mr. Mayor. When I first looked at the Labour amendment, I wasn't entirely sure what it meant. What I thought it probably was their usual, they don't actually want us to have a victory, so they're going to amend it to pretend it's their amendment, while keeping the meaning the same. But the more I've listened to the Labour speakers, the more I've realised that actually that's not what they're doing at all. They're actually entirely happy for some enormous development, and I suspect I'd love to know what they really think, because it's quite clear from the speeches that we've just heard from Councillor Allison that he's actually quite enthusiastic about this idea. How he thinks that building 9 kilometres of roads doesn't involve concreting over large amounts of greenery, if he actually looked at the construction of the grass courts, he'd actually understand a lot better about the use of concrete there as well. So I'm quite astonished not to hear a very clear support for the very sensible decision that the Labour Council in 1993 made, that they heard what the All England Club had to say, but they heard it, but they didn't entirely trust it, and therefore they were going to put into place strong legal covenants. Now, of course, there are separate issues in planning and in legal covenants. And when we're on the planning committee, we're sometimes reminded of that. And I should say, by the way, that of course, I would have no intention of voting on this at the planning committee. That's why we have substitute members. But Mr. Mayor, it's absolutely clear that the Labour Council are not committed to enforcing this restrictive covenant, that actually they're quite enthusiastic about the plans of the All England Club to build 9 kilometres of roads, 38 buildings, and that they cannot be trusted to do the very simple thing that we've asked them to do, to enforce the covenants that their predecessors very sensibly put in place.
If there are no, I have an indication of someone wish to speak. Okay, Councillor Ward.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I wanted to just clarify a point as Chair of the Planning Applications Committee. A couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting, myself, the Vice Chair of the committee and the officers, and it's in terms of when things come in front of the committee. Myself, Councillor Crowe, were both very clear that no application will be brought forward to before the election, and no application will be postponed to after the election for any political reason. Council officers will make their own decisions. When reports are ready to come before the committee, that's when it will happen. No politics involved. Thank you.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Kohler, do you wish to use your right of reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sometimes I despair. Councillor Allison, you portentously tell us there's a difference between covenants and planning applications, and then you and Councillor Fraser spend your speeches confusing the two. This is a motion about the covenant. The word irrespective of planning is there for a reason. The phrase is there for a reason. We're asking you to pledge to enforce the covenants. Councillor Barlow also seemed to confuse the two. But then, you know, I deliberately didn't attack the Tories in my speech. I thought, given that we both are opposing the building of the show court, that we would work together. But of course, Councillor Barlow, as I'm sure people watching television will have seen, could not resist his partisan points. To answer you, Councillor Barlow, it is of course completely stupid for one party to reveal the legal opinion when it might be in a dispute with the other party. To try and force the council to do so is incoherent or vaguely suspicious that somehow you want to help the ALTC. As for tennis courts on Wimbledon Park, we got that from the Friends of Wimbledon Park. So rather than attack us for make-believe that you could have tennis courts there for the preliminary rounds, talk to the Friends of Wimbledon Park who have come up with the plan. Really, you should not attack those on your own side when you're fighting a battle. The question is simply this. It's an easy enough point to understand, Councillor Allison. It's not difficult. And here's a nice simple point for you. Would you please simply say yes or no? Will you enforce the covenant? Thank you.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Members could indicate they're for, raise your hands. Those against? Those not voting? Okay. Thank you. The votes are 4, 26, against 8, not voting 18. So in that case, the amendment is carried. I now call a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Members indicate for. Those against? Those not voting? Okay. Right, the result is 431 against 0, not voting 21. Thank you. So we move on to item, the motion is therefore passed. Notice of motion number 11, Councillor Kohler, please move the motion.
Now, as you probably noticed, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, as you probably noticed, just the submission of our original motion seems to have disturbed the Met from their reverie with the belated announcement they are now actively investigating no less than 12 parties held at number 10. I'm told I must now ask permission of the council to alter the motion in the terms that you see before you. So I think we now go to a vote, do we, Mr. Mayor?
Peter now ask the council if they agree to you amending your or revising your motion. Is that agreed? Agreed, right? Therefore, go ahead with your revised.
I hope I get more time now. So the police are now going to investigate the 12 parties number 10. I think the phrase is be careful for what you wish for. Something I'm sure some of the erstwhile supporters of Boris Johnson sitting in front of me are thinking right now. Along with Lord Sumption, former DPPs, every criminal barrister I know, and MPs from all sides of the House, no one can understand why the Met decided their belated decision to investigate meant that Sue Gray's report, as opposed to her sanitised update, had to be delayed for up to a year, I think they've just said. Whether it's a cock-up or a conspiracy, it does no one, apart possibly from the Prime Minister, any favours. It also meant we need to amend, but not withdraw our motion. Because notwithstanding Sue Gray's conceding to the Met's entreaties, she has said enough to make it abundantly clear the Prime Minister's position is untenable. It's all there in black and white in the report, now amended motion. There were failures of leadership and judgment in number 10, resulting in gatherings that should not have been allowed to take place or develop in the way that they did. How can anyone support the Prime Minister after that damning indictment, which is why this motion asks Councillor Allison to write to our 2 MPs and ask them to publicly call for his resignation? It seems sensible enough. But I understand the Tory leadership object to this motion on the bizarre grounds it is not a subject that affects Merton. Really, Councillor McLean? Let me spell it out to you. How many of our constituents suffered obeying instructions Boris Johnson imposed so rigidly and took so lightly? Not allowed us to say goodbye to loved ones at the end, forced to watch funerals online, cancelled weddings and family celebrations. If you don't believe me, Councillor McLean, have a word with Stephen Hammond and ask him how many emails he has had from constituents who very firmly believe the Prime Minister's actions and palpable contempt for their sacrifices affected them. I can't persuade you, Councillor McLean. I hope some on your side will break ranks and join the rest of us in saying enough is enough. Boris Johnson must go, and this council should speak as one in urging our MPs to do all they can to make it happen. Thank you.
Now, or reserve your right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to say, Councillor Bakari would have given the speech tonight, so I'm just formally seconding.
Allison. No, Councillor Pecuniary is not joining us online. So Councillor Fairclough has formally seconded, but not speaking. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I just want to check. At the last meeting, it was agreed by all parties that only motions that adhered to SMART principles would be allowed. This is very clearly a political knockabout motion, and so I just needed your judgment that political motions are in order now.
You're asking me? Yes. I'm going to defer to my friends on my right. I don't. Each motion is considered before it comes to council and it was ruled in. Right. So you have the floor.
So I'll start my time now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that judgment, because I know that this motion matters a lot to us. I didn't see my mum or dad for months on end. They stuck to the rules. My brother, who married a Japanese woman, hasn't been able to come back here to see me. He stuck to the rules. My nieces and nephews, little children, have missed school and had their birthday parties at home, alone. They all stuck to the rules. My mother-in-law was one of those told to isolate completely during COVID. Nobody realised and she didn't notice it. But while she was locked down alone, her eyes started to lose sight. But she stuck to the rules. Her appointments were cancelled. She wasn't allowed to see her GP. They were sticking to the rules. And now it's too late to operate. And now she's registered blind. She can't see because everyone stuck to the rules. And as most of you know, my father-in-law, who'd had a form of dementia for many years, but was living very happily in Altandia Care Home in Long Thornton Ward, could only see us when we were allowed from an upstairs window and from his dining room. Lack of company meant he deteriorated. We only saw him when the end came. And when his test showed that he'd had COVID, they covered his coffin and we never even saw his body. We stuck to the rules. Mr. Mayor, if the Tories want to know why people are so angry about Partygate, they should realise that this may have been my family, but it happened to countless other families, countless other families. We all stuck to the rules. They made the rules, but they did not stick to the rules. And then they lied about it, all a load of rhubarb. And now the police are involved. For goodness sake, you can't even look at me. That lot there, no, they broke the rules. They know what kind of person our Prime Minister is.
On a point of order, Mr. Mayor, the Leader of the Council is accusing councillors on this side of the chamber of all sorts of things, and he has no right to do that.
Can I ask you to direct to me, as you are doing anyway, I know, but to finish your, take that into account and finish your speech.
Mr. Mayor, I must protest at this consistent, and I want it not included in my time. I would like it to be recorded that there is a tactic of interrupting speakers mid-flow when they're very emotional, and it is not right. That is what the Conservative Party in Merton is like. That is the sort of behaviour that we should expect, and you should be ruling on that, Mr. Mayor.
Only when the speeches are inaccurate. If the council is
Sit down, please.
accurate,
Sit down, please. Can I make a comment here?
Accuracy is all we ask.
Could you make it clear when you're speaking, Leader, that you are referring to the generic the party in power, not the specifics locally here.
To everybody that I'm referring to the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party leadership.
Not what you said. Not what you said.
Clarification, and we'll take that clarification now and move on. You've not used up any time. You had 30 seconds left. You've got 30 seconds left now.
And I'm saying that this lot here in this chamber know that the leadership of the Conservative Party broke the rules. They know what kind of person our Prime Minister is and what kind of people work for him, and they have said nothing. Well, the people of Merton stuck to the rules, and we are furious. So will they stick up for their disgraceful Prime Minister, or will they stick up for my mum and dad, my brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, my parents-in-law, and the people of Merton? Everyone else supports this motion. Will they?
Councillor Howard. Councillor Dean, you're distracting me by standing. Sorry. Okay. If you wish to stand and stretch your legs outside here. Thank you. Can we just get Councillor Howard has now got the floor. He's standing.
Thank you. Well, walking into a maelstrom there. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear that we, these councillors in this chamber, do not defend the social gatherings emerging from these investigations. We're perfectly happy to see them investigated. We're perfectly happy to see those who are found to be in breach of the rules, law, whatever, will be suitably punished. We're perfectly happy with that. Now, moving on to respond to this motion, I'm sorry, your opening point was you saw this as a bit of political knockabout, and I think you were correct in that judgment, frankly, although you were obviously prepared for the answer you wished to hear. So the response to this motion is that I think we have to try and get inside the mindset behind it. Like me, Councillor Kohler is a lecturer, property law to Russians last time I asked. I guess he must have been grateful for the relative respectability afforded by his ownership of a burlesque drinking establishment. Nevertheless, it struck me, therefore, that an academic framework must be at use here, one perhaps that I might also be familiar with. I then recalled, as you recalled, Merton Park's unanimously passed motion in favour of SMART principles. And you remember, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, some debate there, and time-bound. The problem is that when I overlaid SMART onto this motion, it refused to fit until I altered the letters to stand for something else. Like an optician, I experimented with different words until the analysis came into sharper focus. So here goes. S is for shameless. The motion opens with reference to the sacrifice and suffering of Merton's residents, for which we should all feel and show immense respect. But here it is disrespected, as it is clear that by the end of the text, the Lib Dems are cynically harnessing that suffering in an effort to score political points at the national level and continue their petty campaign against the MP for Wimbledon. Which brings us to M for manipulative. By citing that suffering, the Lib Dems are hoping to trigger an automatic raising of hands in favour from all sides. But on this side, we will not fall for it, and nor should you on that side. Because that brings us to A, which is for all about me, which is basically that this motion is all about Councillor Kohler's personal campaign to become an MP, in the process of which he will twist any cause within or beyond the sphere of this chamber to achieve his ends. Now that's a vanity project. And so too are, which until the removal of the request for a police investigation was going to be redundant. It would, of course, been redundant, but in fact it still applies because this motion serves no useful purpose other than to feed into Councillor Kohler's addiction, an addiction for opportunistic grandstanding. And finally to T, which is time wasting. The fact that the Lib Dems should apologise for wasting valuable council time and resource on a self-serving motion which shows no focus on trying to improve the quality of our residents' lives. I have 1 second left, unwasted.
Councillor McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The total deaths in Merton from COVID between January 2020 and January 22 are 525. Now, some of the families that lost loved ones were not able to say goodbye to them. And I'd like to offer my sincere condolences to all of them. I'd also like to thank the NHS staff, our public health team, our adult social care team, and all our staff who worked so hard to support our community through this difficult time. Mr. Mayor, my youngest daughter, educated in Merton, is now teaching in the same primary school she attended. And one of the key lessons she teaches her primary school children is the importance of observing the rules. When they break them, they are encouraged to take responsibility and apologise. Clearly, this is not on the curriculum at Eton. If you listen to some of the nonsense the country has been served up over the last few weeks, all legal advice was followed completely in number 10. I have been repeatedly assured there was no party and no COVID rules were broken. I did not see the invitation. I admitted I attended the party, but it was a work event. Nobody told me it was against the rules. I only stayed for 10 minutes, and then Connor Burns, the spectacular, he was ambushed by a cake. Mr. Mayor, this would not hold any water in the primary school in Merton that my daughter teaches in. But one of the reasons that I raised this was that last Thursday, she gave birth to her first child. It was a difficult birth, and I was so glad that her husband was at her side throughout the 52 hours that she was in labour. But it did make me think how many women were in that position and were unable to get the support of their husband. And Mr. Mayor, we heard Aaron Bell MP, a Conservative MP, speak movingly of his grandmother's funeral. I attended the funeral of my aunt in lockdown, and there was a really pitiful turnout allowed to that funeral, but we did not break the rules. Mr. Mayor, people that set the rules and break them should resign, and that's what this motion calls for. I support it.
Councillor Kohler, do you wish to use your right to reply? No, okay. I will now call for a vote on the motion. Members, please indicate for. Those against? Those not voting? Thank you. The outcome is 434 against 0, not voting 18. Thank you. The motion, we'll now move on to item 12, which is the notice of motion from the Conservative group on road charging. Councillor Ormerod, please move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to propose this motion. Parking taxes, well, here we go. What this council fails to understand is that the ever overcomplicated and increases on Merton residents can be incredibly confusing. Many residents don't read some of the local literature or anything that's actually provided on some of those, the price rises, effectively taxes, and they only actually find out about the significant hikes when they come to renew their annual permits, which is therefore not being budgeted for. What a good effective council should be providing is excellent value for money via the council tax system and try its best to make lives easier for the residents that vote for them. When it comes to parking, particularly those living within the CPZs, this certainly is not the case. CPZs in Merton were originally brought about so that residents could park on their own streets where they live, rather than not being able to do so because of other visiting vehicles using local amenities and therefore taking up residents' parking spaces. The permits were to be for the convenience for residents at a nominal fee. What has happened is the reverse over time, where the council has used this means of generating revenue by hiking prices using the proviso of cleaning the air, which it doesn't effectively monitor on a regular basis as yet. In appreciation that the council wishes to force residents onto public transport, but this isn't always feasible for all residents. Most families do want and indeed need a car and should have the choice. It's about choice to be able to do so, not be heavily taxed because the council wants them not to drive. I've had elderly residents call me concerned as they have various carers who come to visit and look after them, and they struggle to know what to do when there are several carers with different types of vehicles. They can't dictate to the carer which vehicle to drive when visiting them because they don't know which carer will arrive. The parking situation in Merton has become somewhat of a dictatorship because residents aren't being heard. So we also hear about go green, go electric, but we don't make it, but the council does not make it easy for people with electric vehicles to be able to charge their vehicles themselves. I appreciate and I read the response to the questions about being the top 20% of local authorities. To me, being in the top 20% isn't quite good enough. And I'm aware that there's 258 electric vehicle charging points. I don't see that as being a success. I'd like to see that probably in one ward, not across the borough overall. Emissions-based charging being halted, has it really? Or is it actually just on hold for now? I expect on hold and not halted as this administration due to the upcoming election. So in review, does taxing parked cars reduce pollution? No, it doesn't. Has this administration's ever rising parking tax impacted those on the lowest incomes the hardest? Yes, it has. Have these taxes hit families and the elderly the most? Yes, they have. Has the taxation on cars reduced emissions? No, it has not. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. This is being seconded by Councillor Dean. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
Mr. Mayor, I second this motion. Thank you very much. Tax. Under any Labour authority, Mr. Mayor, taxes always go up, never down. Taxes which make the poor poorer. And like clockwork, London's mayor wants to tax us more. Again, this time wanting to tax the ground beneath us. But why take cash from ordinary people? Is it for better services? Well, no, the council's own surveys prove that Merton has not got better services over the years as the tax take goes up. Is it about bridging the gap? No, just look at the health and life expectancy of those who live in Labour areas. Or better roads, tax through more CPZ fees. Note the council's own number show that there's less investment in Merton's roads today than ever before. Merton's tarmac is unfit for both cyclists and vehicles alike. So these continual tax increases do not lead to better Merton services, but tax hikes do lead, Mr. Mayor, to poverty. And it's not just poverty that Labour causes in Merton through their annual tax hikes. Vastly increasing the price of the CPZ fees led to residents across Wimbledon and Raynes Park in particular to rip up their gardens and squashing nature's benefit of well-being and fresh air. It was a Labour tax that destroyed the environment totally unnecessarily. And now, of course, we've got Labour's mayor on the tax take warpath too. Now, the trouble is with the mayor, as the great Maggie Thatcher said, is that he's run out of other people's money. So now he's moving on to someone else's territory. Now, Labour councillors in Merton, Mr. Mayor, they've always believed that the wallets of Mertonians belong to them when it comes to taxing cars and roads. The mayor, with his road tax plans, is stepping on their turf when they want to charge residents in both Wimbledon and Mitcham and Morden constituencies up to £690 more per vehicle to park outside their own homes. Mr. Mayor, Merton Labour want to tax a car for being parked, and London's Labour Mayor wants to tax the same car for moving. Now, these excess taxes are responsible for Merton becoming unaffordable for the average person. The council tax in this borough is the second biggest cost per month for everybody, not just the rich, not just the middle classes, but for the poor. And it's the working classes who are the whipping boys for this Labour Party's tax hikes. Now, I say to the good people of Merton, if you want the freedom to own and drive a car and have some pounds in your own pocket, then the only way to stop Labour's tax madness, Mr. Mayor, is to vote Conservative. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have an amendment. Councillor Lanning, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this is a topic I know the Conservative group has a keen interest in. It's one of the most significant and complex challenges facing our borough and our country. Air pollution as a global public health emergency, causing cancer, stroke, and heart disease. A major contributor to the climate emergency, with the most deprived hit the hardest. And so, what action is the Conservative group proposing tonight? Their bold solution, Mr. Mayor, is to write an angry letter. Now, Mr. Mayor, I do acknowledge that this motion isn't seeking to directly tackle climate change or poor air quality, but then I would ask, what is it seeking to do? Because on this side, while we're working with residents, schools and businesses to roll out school streets, low traffic neighbourhoods, and the highest number of air quality sensors of any London borough, all I see in this motion is another emphatic denial of one of the main contributors to poor air quality. Mr. Mayor, there is no escaping that 60% of NO2 emissions in Merton come from road transport, and that air pollution kills 9,000 Londoners every year. So no matter how many trees we plant, Mr. Mayor, we can't meaningfully tackle this problem without real leadership. Now, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate this is a sore subject, and the Conservative group may be struggling with the concept of leadership right now, so maybe we can enlighten them. Mr. Mayor, on air quality and climate change, for a start, it means making active and sustainable travel the easy choice. It's about investing £20 million on sustainable transport schemes over the last 6 years, being ranked second in Outer London by the Healthy Streets Scorecard, and implementing policies that have seen 15% of residential permits shift to a lower emission band since 2020. But Mr. Mayor, we know that a significant shift to sustainable modes of transport isn't going to happen overnight, and we do need to be careful to nudge, not shove. So at a time when households face a hike in energy prices, a cut to universal credit payments, and a rise in national insurance, we need to carefully consider the impacts of these before passing on further financial burdens to our residents. So while we must commit to policy that cleans up our air by reducing reliance on road transport, so too do we need a properly funded and sustainable transport network that our residents can rely on. We will continue to work with the Mayor of London to get there, while also working with our residents to make the long-term shift to cleaner and greener transport for their own well-being and that of the borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The amendment has been seconded by Councillor Well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I will say it's very rich coming from the Conservatives in terms of taxation, when we've got the highest tax burden since the 1950s and a 1.25% national insurance rise, which will hit on some of the poorest people in society. That's what they're doing in government. London as a city has made great strides forward in reducing emissions and encouraging more active forms of transport. Here in Merton, we have seen the rollout of 35 school streets, which improves the environment outside schools, along with encouraging walking and cycling. As a borough, we have one of the highest numbers of low traffic neighbourhoods in London and introduced further ones in the last 18 months, which have now been made permanent. We also have to recognise the damage caused due to our environment through emissions and air pollution. It is why we are right to levy lower charges for those using electric vehicles. And as Councillor Lanning just said, we obviously have seen a significant increase in their numbers over the last year. In terms of our parking charges, they are far below the figures of Conservative-run Wandsworth. The charges we have here in Merton have been linked to public transport accessibility in an area, along with hours of operation. Where access is better, the more the charge is, because we want to encourage people to get out of their cars and use public transport or more active forms of travel. As a council, we froze these charges for a number of years. As Cabinet Lead Member for Transport, it also concerns me that the Tories of Merton have failed to stand up for Merton, including Transport for London, which has seen its income slashed as a result of falling passenger numbers as a result of the pandemic. Unlike the train companies, which have been bailed out by government, no such support has been given to TfL, where we see continually political games being played by the Conservative government against them. They may laugh and sneer, but that shows their real attitude towards Londoners. And we are seeing now damaging cuts to our tube and bus services as a result of those funding issues. Likewise, we have seen local implementation funding plans stopped, which has been used to fund road safety schemes in Merton. There has been changes made to the freedom passes, which impacts on our residents as a result of government imposed conditions. We also as well continue to see the highest fares in Europe, with having to put them up further as a result of a condition of bailout. It is completely wrong to say that nothing has happened in London about the pollution crisis when the Mayor has expanded ULEZ to both the North and South Circular, which already has had an impact in terms of emission and air quality by encouraging people to switch away from high polluting vehicles. Here in Merton, we have seen more electric buses on our streets, including the 200 and the 264 next year. But TfL also as well need to get the proper funding to enable more electric buses to happen, which can also benefit bus manufacturers in the North and in the Midlands. I ask Council to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, there's a tweet from a former local Conservative councillor that always stuck in my mind as an example of how not to lose an election. In 2018, she tweeted to her followers, "We didn't fail. The electorate failed themselves by not voting for us." She goes on, "Unfortunately, there seems to be a section of people in Merton who do not really understand how local politics works and vote for entirely the wrong reasons." I've always found this more than a little patronising, Mr. Mayor. However, Mr. Mayor, when I read motions like this, I wonder if I misread the tweet. When she says there's a section of people who don't really understand how local politics works, perhaps she meant her fellow Conservative councillors. Mr. Mayor, this is a dog's breakfast of a motion, attempting to find something that will give someone, somewhere, anyone, a reason to vote for them. Now, indeed, my group was the first to point out that the doubling of parking charges in Wimbledon and Raynes Park largely affected areas that didn't tend to elect Labour councillors. But we've heard from Councillor Omerod and Councillor Dean mention all sorts of parking charges, CPZs, carers, electric cars. I don't know if the person who wrote this motion kind of sort of checked in with you. This is about the ULEZ. Did you mention that? That's the focus of their attack, opposing the potential expansion of the Mayor of London's ULEZ, apparently what they believe in. Mr. Mayor, this in itself is a little confusing. The Conservative group here are on record calling for the Mayor's ULEZ scheme to be extended to Merton as soon as possible. The Deputy Leader was calling for this late last year. Mr. Mayor, I'll quote the November 21 Sustainable Communities Panel meeting minutes. Councillor Daniel Holden requested the panel look at reviewing the diesel surcharge so it's more harmonised with the Mayor's ULEZ. Councillor Holden has received multiple letters from residents concerned over the anomaly of being able to drive all day long in the Mayor's ULEZ, but returning to Merton and having to pay large amounts. So there you have it. Mr. Mayor, this is an example of two things. First, it's the complete lack of principle in our local Conservative group. They really will say anything if they think it will win them votes. Secondly, it shows their complete incompetence and incoherence, and that blatant inconsistency wasn't picked up. Indeed, you didn't mention ULEZ at all. Mr. Mayor, this isn't a group going into an election thinking it will form the next administration. It's a group who really doesn't understand how local politics works, a group that doesn't listen to people, understand their problems, and then go on to take action. It's a group thrashing around, desperate to hold on to their seats. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Ormerod, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in terms of some inaccuracies which I've heard throughout the evening, in terms of Councillor Welton, it's my understanding that since the beginning of the pandemic, the government has provided £4 billion to TfL. And also in terms of the reference to Councillor Daniel Holden, I think you'll probably find that's a massive misinterpretation of the words that he's actually said before. And also in terms of making it easy for people to charge electric vehicles, I mean, it's been, I think, 4 years in this chamber, and it's always about leading up to making things better, to make things greener. But I don't think after 4 years being at 258 electric vehicle charging points is anywhere near sufficient. So essentially, pure and simple, the Labour policy is a tax increase, pure and simple. That's what Labour wants, is an additional tax rises. It all relates to tax and tax alone. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Members raise their hands for the amendment. Those against? Those not voting? Right. For the amendment 26, against 22, not voting 3. So the amendment now becomes the substantive motion. I now call for a vote on the substantive motion. Is that agreed? Oh, I just thought I'd try it once tonight. Can I have those in favour, those voting for, to raise their hands, please? Those against? Those not voting? That is for the amended motion 26 for, 17 against, 9 not voting. Thank you. So we now move on to the notice of motion, item 13, the Conservative motion on Lavender Nursery. Councillor McLean, would you please move your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I begin by clarifying the decision-making process that relates to St Helier, as the Leader of the Council seems confused. The NHS had made the decision on the restructuring. The government is providing the money. The Conservative group preferred site. Yes,
sorry,
yes, it will. We'll link in very shortly.
I just want to make sure it's the right one. Okay,
So
thank you.
but we said we would support accept the NHS decisions and the clinicians. And we also support the NHS policy that having the right care in the right place at the right time. Labour have blocked better healthcare provision for 2 decades, no more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The need for improved ECH provision has been clear for many years. Yes, we have finally given the green light to repurpose Lavender Nursery and increase provision. However, as Councillor Holmes mentioned at a previous council meeting, Labour had to be dragged kicking and screaming towards doing the right thing. Quite frankly, Mr. Mayor, the opposition to this was a disgrace. Many Labour councillors in this chamber stood on the wrong side, and they know it. This campaign was coordinated by the Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, who stood against improving life for the most vulnerable children in Merton. The MP that calls the shots in their party and this council. The MP who did not care about the future of the most vulnerable children in Merton, and the MP who is tearing the Labour group apart at the seams. This is where democracy in Merton has fallen to, because Labour were unwilling to challenge her and they were too weak to risk their personal positions. Quite frankly, they have let down themselves and they have damaged our local democracy in the process. And what's the end result for Labour? Able cabinet members driven out, other cabinet members deselected and forced to move wards. Members of your team with responsibility thrown out, the Leader of the Council run out of Mitcham and Morden. And why? Because ultimately, even though they waited for too long, even though they were too weak, they finally did do the right thing on Lavender Nursery. As a group, you have been too cowardly to deal with the undemocratic influence of the MP for Mitcham and Morden, and now you are paying the price for it. Our motion offers Labour the chance to do the right thing, to make a clear stand and say that together, this council wants more educational provision for the most vulnerable children in Merton. Surely, after all you've been through on this issue, you cannot oppose that. And to send a message that this chamber and this council will not be bullied and pushed around by the MP for Mitcham and Morden. Frankly, this motion gives you the chance to stand up for yourselves and for local democracy. Be on Merton's side, just as eventually you're on the side of the most vulnerable children, and support democracy in this chamber and in this council. I move this motion.
Councillor Holmes, you're seconding the motion. Do you wish to speak now? Or
Thank
is that
you.
right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I will speak now, and I'm happy to second this motion. Mr. Mayor, at the heart of this Labour civil conflict is a school and a school building and what is most appropriate for the children. So, Mr. Mayor, as a governor of the school, I'm going to lay out this evening 7 facts. If there's any member of this council that disagrees with any of the facts, with your permission, Mr. Mayor, I'd be very happy for them to intervene. But I don't think that there's anything that I'm going to say that can be legitimately disagreed with. So, Mr. Mayor, fact number 1 is that the children that are going into this new building are amongst the most vulnerable in our borough. Those who are most ill, because that is their background, suffering from anxiety, depression, serious illness, and in some cases, young people who don't make it to the end of their school life. Fact number 2, officers tell us there is a surplus of places, of nursery places in Merton. That's something that officers have told us. Fact number 3, there is a £37 million overspend in the DSG, and special needs are a big part of that. Fact number 4, the former Cabinet Member for Finance, a great loss to Merton, said in front of Councillor Draper, Councillor Henry, Councillor Makin, Councillor Stringer, and others, that it took time to understand what was causing the deficit. Fact number 5, the Cabinet Member for Education, who, as you all know, I think very highly of, told all of us in this council chamber in response to me at a previous council meeting that she would continue to implement her programme of increasing staff numbers over trying to control the deficit. Fact number 6, officers have told us, advised us that alternatives will be more expensive. And Mr. Mayor, fact number 7, we are now dependent on a government bailout to sort out this mess. Mr. Mayor, nobody tried to intervene when I said those 7 facts. Nobody appeared to disagree or call out. So, Mr. Mayor, if we're agreed, what has the debate been about? Why is it that Labour was split over this issue? Why is it that so much damage has been caused to so many people because of an argument that tonight we all seem to be able to agree on? Mr. Mayor, it didn't take me years to understand what was causing this deficit. Every year I've called for special needs transport to be looked at, and now it is. Years ago, I chaired a task group about bringing services back inside the borough. We should have done that sooner. We should have done that more fundamentally. Mr. Mayor, political courage has actually been shown by Councillor Allison, by Councillor Stringer, and by others, and it is rarer than it used to be. And I actually pay tribute to them for the courage they've shown and the price they've paid for that courage. But Mr. Mayor, why have they done that? They've done that because they can see the argument was clear and other members of the Labour group didn't. They can see this deficit has gone up year after year of mismanagement, of overspend, of missed opportunities, of missed chances to resolve it. So in the end, action had to be taken. Mr. Mayor, I wish there was wider coverage and wider participation in local government by residents. And I think it's a great shame that there isn't, because after what's happened over the last few years with Morentum, with the Clarion debacle, and now with this, if the residents of Merton actually knew what you were doing and actually knew the decisions you were taking, come May, you would lose, lose, lose. Mr. Mayor, I'm very happy to second this motion.
Councillor McGrath.
Mr. Mayor, a few meetings ago, we were accused of only putting in motions so that we could put them on a leaflet. That's certainly something nobody's ever going to be able to say of this very odd motion, which actually agrees with the decision that the council has taken. Now, there are certainly issues about the size of the DSG deficit, although I might remind council that Councillor Gretton recently said that it wasn't a problem. Before the Tories suddenly decided it was a huge problem. And there's a real problem with the failure of the Conservative government to properly fund our children's education. That's a real problem. And the Tory motion accepts that the repurposing of the nursery was the right thing to do. So, Mr. Mayor, what is the point? Well, I can tell you, Mr. Mayor, it's to try and exploit divisions within the Labour group. Mr. Mayor, there's no need for them to try and do that. From all the rumours that we hear about people not getting deselected in the Labour group and other people standing down because they don't get on with the council leader, there's no need for the Tories to try and stir up trouble. They've got enough trouble as it is. And then there's the extremely odd criticism of Siobhan McDonough. Now, Mr. Mayor, I'd much rather that my friend Luke Taylor, who was our excellent candidate at the general election, had been elected, but Siobhan McDonough won the election. It's bizarre to complain that it's undemocratic for her to try and affect things that happen in our borough. But perhaps, Mr. Mayor, it tells us quite a lot about why Stephen Hammond is such a useless MP when it comes to local issues. The Conservatives don't think that MPs should have anything to say with local issues in this borough. Well, honestly, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Barlow was kind enough to remind us and remind anybody watching on television and on YouTube of our slogan. It's not often our opponents remind people of our slogan, a fresh start for Merton, but I'm grateful to him for doing so. And my word, we need a fresh start. Mr. Mayor, this is a tawdry and rather pointless motion from a tawdry and pointless party. If this is the best they can come up with, they richly deserve the drubbing they're going to get on May the 5th from the people of Wimbledon.
Councillor Draper. Springer. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I became a local councillor to represent local residents and to make a difference to the lives of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people. I did not enter politics to spend my time discussing nonsense motions from a political party now more famous for partying than politics. So I won't waste much time in dismissing this motion. We've already heard some arguments against it. And what an odd motion it is, showing full support and agreement for a decision that we in Merton Labour have already made about provision for very ill pupils. And it demands that we take actions that we are already taking to grow the number of state-run special school places. I mentioned earlier that there'll be 276 additional places in September. And then for good measure, it chucks in a completely unnecessary, and I would say uncivil, ad hominem attack on an individual politician. Mr. Mayor, this motion is not worth the paper it is written on. To amend it so that it would make sense would involve more edits than the police demanded of Sue Gray's report. So we will be voting down this motion. We discussed at length in recent meeting the work that we're doing to deal with the growth in demand and therefore the growth in spending for pupils with special educational needs. I argued then that the additional government resources were necessary here. The Conservatives in those speeches said that I was wrong and we should just cut provision now. I'm glad that it looks like the Department for Education agrees with us, not the Merton Conservatives, and they've been working with us to try and agree an investment and recovery plan, which, yes, of course, would require additional staff to deliver. Mr. Mayor, I hope that colleagues will also remember that in an even more recent meeting, we all agreed that motion that's already been mentioned tonight from the Merton Park Independent Group, that motions taken to the council should be focused on objectives that can make real change, not waste time on political point scoring. So how typical of the Conservatives that they supported that motion and then immediately abandoned its principles. We in Labour united in our focus on delivering a great education for every single child, no matter what their needs. And we will be voting down this motion and getting on with our job. Thank you.
Councillor Draper.
My turn now. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is a sad little motion, isn't it, really? Because what we had in Lavender was an excellent and successful Sure Start nursery, one of many founded under the Blair government to help young parents, particularly single mothers, help themselves out of poverty by going back to work. And then the Sure Starts were starved of essential funding by the incoming Tory government until across the country, one by one, they were forced to close. And in Mitcham, we had one last remaining Sure Start, a fine reminder of more humane times now lost to us. But Mr. Mayor, you can't run a council on memories, however good. And in the meantime, we had a cohort of extremely vulnerable young people in the Merton Medical Education Service, whose numbers had outgrown the provision we'd given them, who were being educated in substandard accommodation. Now, in a decent world, Mr. Mayor, in a Labour world, you'd have a Sure Start and an MMES in Mitcham in harmony, side by side. But the Conservative world, a world that underfinances education and then calls the resulting problems an overspend, you have to choose one or the other. And so we chose. And yes, we were divided, and yes, it hurt, and it still does. It hurt a lot of people, including the MP for Mitcham and Morden, who'd fought so hard and so well to get that Sure Start in Mitcham in the first place. And I can tell you, Mr. Mayor, that the choice was difficult for me, and I made it, and I campaigned alongside Councillor Holmes as chair and vice chair of Melbury College for MMES as what we believe is the greater need. Not, Mr. Mayor, not so that some cheap and nasty attempt to disrespect a brilliant MP who believes passionately in special needs education could be put before us. And whatever he's told us, Mr. Mayor, I know that James, who's at heart a decent man, will be ashamed of the motion he's talked to. Just as I'm ashamed that we couldn't stop an uncaring, self-serving Tory government from getting to power and forcing this unpleasant decision and so many other unpleasant decisions on us. And that's that. Reject this motion, colleagues. Put it in the bin where it belongs. Thank you very much.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor McLean, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it was quite clear that the DSG overspend and the deficit has been caused by, to a large extent, Labour mismanagement. To use the Cabinet member's own words, she was not prepared to take difficult decisions. And I must also say, very rich of her to mention civility, given her recent tweet. And when the opportunity to increase provision, half the Labour group voted in their group meeting against better provision for the most vulnerable, because they just simply didn't understand the situation. As I've said before in this chamber, the Labour group have a bizarre attitude, just backed up actually by Councillor Drover, that they can set their political priorities and they expect the government to pick up the bill. That is not how it works. You have an envelope of money, you have to work within it. Well, the DSG deficit has been caused by this Labour administration mismanagement, and they can wiggle as much as they want, but that is the fact. Mr. Mayor, former Councillor Byers, the then Finance Cabinet member, provided clarity at the CYP meeting on the 12th of January, when he referenced the overspend. It is fair to say, I quote, "It is fair to say, in the past, the reason it is increasing year on year had not been fully understood." Resigning from the council just days later, keeping his reputation intact as he delivered the truth.
I will now call for a vote on the motion. Members, please indicate for. Those against? Those not voting? Result is 17 for, 31 against, 4 not voting. The motion is lost. So Moving on now to item 14, compulsory purchase orders. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move the recommendation. As a council, we are committed to rebuilding the 3 Clarion estates on Eastfields, High Path and Ravensbury. Last Friday, along with a number of other councillors, I visited the first stage of development at High Path, which will see over 100 brand new residential units, which are all at social rent. All of the people housed in the first stage will come from the existing estate, with the new housing also helping to address many of the people who live in overcrowded accommodation with additional space to meet their living needs. It is hoped that the powers of CPO are exercised as a last resort, but only the council has the power to level these powers. Already many of the leaseholders have sold their homes back to Clarion in buybacks, some of which then have been used for temporary housing. The owners of properties on the estates have already been approached over some years by Clarion with a view to voluntary acquisition of their interests. Clarion has acquired already many properties by negotiation, and negotiations continue. In the past few weeks, remaining owners have been formally served with legal notices asking them to provide details of all those people who may have an interest in the properties. This will assist in ensuring that contact is made with all such people. While planning permission outline consent has been granted for the regeneration and rebuilding of all 3 estates, Ravensbury Estate has full planning permission, with the first stage already completed. At High Path, phase 1 is nearly completed, and permission has already been granted in full for phase 2. Eastfield phase 1 was submitted on the 13th of December, and the next phase of High Path is due to be submitted in the summer of 2022. After legal advice, this power is with the Cabinet, that like any of our decision, it will be subject to call-in by scrutiny if they so wish. It is important that we act in accordance with the council constitution in respect to those properties where vacant possession would be required, and this could not be secured voluntarily. The statutory framework governing the making of CPOs is under Section 226 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. It has become clear that making a CPO is an executive dysfunction. The preconditions set out in the 2018 report have now been met, and officers are in the process of preparing a report for Cabinet on the 21st of March, recommending that the Director of Environment and Regen be authorised to make and serve CPOs on the basis of a detailed statement of reasons which will be appended to that report. I ask Council to approve these recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Pritchard.
I formally second this. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't need to speak.
Mr. Mayor, the point of this discussion is whether or not the compulsory purchase orders, when they're being decided on, should they be heard and decided on in Cabinet, or with the benefit of some additional scrutiny and a full report to this chamber in full council, Mr. Mayor. I think for most councils, one might expect compulsory purchase orders to be heard within Cabinet. But unfortunately, what we've seen here within this council administration, this Labour Cabinet, Mr. Mayor, have been a couple of very significant disasters in the context of housing and regeneration. First of all, we've heard about Clarion recently, how there was £72 million of funding coming to our borough, which could have delivered all kinds of things like support for schools, helping children's services, planting trees, improving parks and green spaces, you name it, the list goes on. But the Labour Council, through the incompetence of the Cabinet, forgot to put a contract in place when they did the regeneration deal with with Clarion several years ago, and had to hand back the funding, the finance of the £72 million. And what a disaster that has been for our borough, Mr. Mayor. And that's not the only disaster when it comes to the possible use of compulsory purchase orders.
and regeneration projects. Just look outside this building here, Mr. Mayor. Morden's in desperate need of regeneration. And this Labour cabinet was so incompetent, it spent 10 years working on the project and couldn't put anything together. So the £50 million of funding which was available from TfL and the £25 million, that's £75 million in total, Mr. Mayor, that funding collapsed, is no longer available simply because this incompetent Labour cabinet couldn't get the regeneration project together in time. If you add those two sums together, Mr. Mayor, £72 million lost through the Clarion clawback, which was a disaster. £75 million of TfL potential funding coming into this borough, which was lost again by the Labour cabinet's incompetence, Mr. Mayor. That's 2 years council tax down the drain, and it's precisely because of that, Mr. Mayor, that I think everybody in this borough wants these compulsory purchase order decisions on very significant housing projects, regeneration projects. People want them to go ahead, so they should be heard with full proper scrutiny in this chamber, and therefore we should vote against the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Pritchard. You reserve your right. Don't wish to speak. Okay. Councillor Weltham. There's no other speakers, so do you wish to use your right to reply?
I just obviously want to come back on a few points in relation to Councillor Gretton. Obviously, this decision has been taken in relation to legal advice that it's a cabinet decision. I completely disagree in terms of the waiving of SIL money. The £72 million is kick-starting this regeneration scheme to take place. The Conservatives are opposed to the regeneration. That's why they're opposed to the 72 million. We know that is the truth, Mr. Mayor, and they may deny it, they may avoid it, but that is the reason they are against it.
Group leader, we are not against the regeneration. There you go. Clear the policy.
They are, they can't, they stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. But we know that that is the truth, Mr. Mayor. This council is actively wanting that regeneration to take place. We want to see new homes be built on all those estates. We have seen the benefits of the first stages of that regeneration scheme. And I believe that that regeneration scheme will overhaul the whole estate in terms of delivering much needed valued new homes, but also as well addressing the many overcrowding issues that exist in relation to them. I ask that council formally approve these recommendations. Thank you.
Is the recommendation agreed? Right, in that case, we proceed to vote. Those voting for. Those against? Those not voting? The votes of 29 for, 17 against, 6 not voting. So the motion is carried. Item 15. Is it? Yes. Item 15, the approval of the pay policy and members' allowances scheme. Councillor Pritchard, will you move this report?
I move this, Mr. Mayor.
By Councillor Allison.
Yeah, formally, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have only one person listed to speak, and that's Councillor McLean. Right, okay. Do you wish to use your right to reply? Okay, I know. I was just going through the motion there. Is the report agreed then? Right, thank you. Calendar of meetings for 22-23. Councillor Allison, will you move this report?
I move this.
Right. Councillor Pritchard?
Second this, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McCain? Right, thank you. No right to reply because there's no one spoken. So is the report agreed? Right, thank you. Changes to membership of committees and other matters. Item 17. Councillor Allison, will you move this report? And Councillor Stringer, your second.
I second this, Mr. Mayor.
Is the report agreed? Thank you. Petitions. There's a table just down the front here. I believe there are 4 petitions coming in. If you'd like to come up. Put them, yeah. Maybe when you get back to your places, you can tell us what the petition was. Right, okay, thank you. Right. Right. Councillor Coley, your petition.
Our petition was almost 1,500 people petitioning the council to enforce the covenants on Wimbledon Park.
Right. Councillor Gould, you already indicated what yours was. Councillor Barlow. Right. Councillor Benbow. Your petition. Dean City Farm. Okay, thank you. Well, do we need to vote on petitions? We received the petitions. Okay, business for the next meeting. Item 23, business for the next meeting. I would like to propose that given the upcoming elections, which no one will have noticed, and noting that the strategic themes are likely to be reviewed in light of the new year, your Merton principles, that the business for the next meeting for the new administration and groups is for the election after May. Is that agreed? Yes. We leave it to then. Okay, that's, I think, concludes the minutes. As many of you will know, I'm not a parent, but I did sort of informally foster a few children in South Africa in their teens. And I remember having a conversation with Matuli, one of them, and I said, what sort of dad do you think I'd have made? And he said, Mike, you'd have been a brilliant father to well-behaved children, but you've been a terrible dad to poorly behaved children. So I do say that partly in jest tonight. So thank you for coming back into line when I asked for it, but we have got to the end of the evening, safe journeys home, and hopefully we'll see each other closer together in March if the conditions are better. Thank you.